Hello, my name is Sylvester Henderson, and I am the CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated. I am so honored this evening to be able to interview Dr. Davin Brown, who is Vice President of Student Services at Sacramento City College. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I appreciate you.
Dr. Brown, could you introduce yourself to our digital media academic world and describe your education and training and all those wonderful things?
I'd be more than happy to. Thank you for the opportunity is where I'd like to start. Always acknowledge the great work that gets us here. You know, a lot of times people just see the end result and are not aware of all of the things that happen behind the camera. And so just want to honor and acknowledge you in this moment and say thank you for extending the opportunity to chat with me, to talk a little bit about my journey, my training, and my experience as not only a leader in higher ed, but a leader in higher ed who has an unapologetic commitment to advancing the work that requires us to tear down barriers when it comes to communities of color, historically marginalized communities, namely the community by which I identify as a Black woman. So thank you so very much for that.
No, thank you for taking the time. Thank you.
No problem. I am Dr. Davin E. Brown. I currently have the great honor of serving as the Vice President of Student Services at the Sacramento City College, the oldest institution of higher education in the state's capital, the seventh oldest institution within the California Community College system in the state of California. My education includes a bachelor's degree in English from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, a master's degree in educational administration with a focus on higher education from California State University, San Bernardino, and a doctorate in educational leadership and management from Drexel University. In addition to extensive higher ed administrative work, I also have a significant, robust experience in the classroom, having taught for Sac State, having taught for Drexel, and having taught for Concordia University at both the master's level and the doctorate level, specifically around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion amongst our administrative ranks, how to prioritize that, digital innovation in the higher ed world, student development theory and higher education leadership, those specific subjects. For the vast majority of my career, I've spent my time at four-year institutions working in both the University of California system and the California State University system, respectively. And just under 8 years ago, I decided, within both of these systems, what I've noticed is that the students that tend to be exceptionally prepared are coming from the California Community College system. So I decided to take my talent in 2017 to the California Community College system, starting first at Folsom Lake College as the Dean of Student Services, or Student Success, rather. And then just under 2 years, bet on myself, pursued a vice presidency, and I've been in that role since July of 2019. So that's a bit of a truncated response to my education and training in the field.
Wow. You know what? I am so honored to really have met you through Herbert English.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was so exciting was that very few people that I have met in the system have had experiences with all the three segments of California higher education. And because I too, primarily in faculty, work for the California State University, the UC system, and the community college. And so that's very, very rare. So I appreciate having that broad perspective. Thank you. Can you describe your work and obligations as a full-time administrator for Sacramento City College? What is that like? Just kind of tell us, what is your typical day like, and what is that like on a good day and a hectic day?
It's a colorful experience. I've maintained a commitment to myself to wallow in joy any opportunity I get. And while the work that we do as administrators at any level of education, but certainly within higher ed, and specifically in today's climate, the work can be heavy. However, for me, the work is always strategic and it's always deeply student-centered, right? So whether it is a summer day where there may be less interactions with students and faculty members because there are fewer of them on campus, or it may be a first day or first week of a fall semester where there are tons of students on campus and faculty is returning, my approach to the work is always strategic, it's always rooted in equity, and it's always focused on what's best for the students. And so as the current Vice President of Student Services, I'm responsible for leading a service area that supports every aspect of the student experience outside of the classroom. And we're talking about from expressing interest in the institution to pursuing the next steps of the matriculation process through access, and then leading to achievement and ultimately enrollment to graduation. So my obligations include strategic leadership in planning, where I will oversee, design, implement, and assess various student support programs and resources, making sure they align with the college's mission, vision, and equity priorities, understanding that my specific college is in a multi-college district, so it should also align with the overall district's mission, vision, and equity priorities. Within my specific role, I also lead various division planning efforts to ensure that our students and our services are responsive to the students' needs, which are often diverse, and also understanding that we lead at student services with the mindset that we need to be ready for students, opposed to assuming that students need to be ready for us. Understanding that our students come to us with a variety of needs, varied expectations, varied commitments to their educational experience, varied obligations. And so it's important that we honor and acknowledge what our students need and be prepared for everything that they come with. My obligations also include equity-driven or equity-specific oversight. So I lead the college's equity and student success initiatives. All of the affinity programs and the learning communities fall under my purview. That's inclusive of all of our historically marginalized student groups. So whether it's our Black student success efforts, our Latinx student success efforts, our LGBTQ plus student success efforts, our Native student success efforts, our Pacific Islanders, our Asian Pacific, our undocumented, our justice involved, our housing and food insecure students, our veteran students, our students who are parents, all of the areas that allow us to focus on our most marginalized or historically underrepresented students. I'm responsible for the overall oversight of those efforts as well. Of course, I have an amazing team of deans and supervisors and exceptional classified professionals and faculty that help shepherd this work along. And we all have a shared commitment to our equity work at the college. I'd say other obligations include things such as supervision and personnel management, the not so fun stuff, where you directly supervise folks, so deans, associate vice presidents, directors, classified professionals, faculty, all of that, and all of the non-instructional areas, right? So we're talking about admissions and records, financial aid, counseling, EOP&S, DSPS, basic needs, undocumented resources, our student equity and success efforts, our veteran center, our CalWorks, our international student programs, all of those sorts of things. And then another area would be resource management, which is exceptionally important when it comes to the California community college system, because we're very heavily legislated, which means we get a lot of funds from and resources from the state government, right? So it's important that we're good stewards of our dollars. And in that specific role and responsibility, I have the great honor of managing and allocating multi-million-dollar categorical and general fund allocation, whether it is categoricals related to SEAT, CARE, CalWorks, Next Up, AB 705 or 1705 funding, making sure that we're ensuring the fiscal responsibility while also maximizing the impact that it has on our students' experience is another responsibility of mine. Cross-functional collaboration, super important to me. And important to my VP colleagues as well at the college, right? So really valuing the strong partnership that the student services side of the house has with our instructional partners, whether that is our classified professionals, our managers, or our faculty, making sure that we are in lockstep with one another to do our very best to ensure that students are being served well in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom. So whether that is leading efforts to build a more cohesive, equity-focused educational experience through policy implementation or review. Most recently, leading the application process for our Black Serving Institution and working in strong partnership with our instructional leaders there, understanding that a commitment to our students that's rooted in equity. Our equity gaps exist not because of anything that's happening in student services, but because of what's not happening in the classroom, right? Students don't find themselves on academic probation or academic dismissal because of a student services effort. It's likely their experience in the classroom. So making sure we're working in strong partnership with our instructional colleagues is really important. I think two other areas that immediately come to mind with respect to my responsibilities include the institutional representation and advocacy. That's really important at the state level, at the district level, amongst community endeavors that I may be a part of, boards that I serve on, things of that nature. And then the other thing that we don't anticipate happens, but happens more often than not, is that crisis response and student well-being, right? How do you lead the college through crisis responsiveness that are crises that are ongoing? So we're talking about basic needs through our Panther Cares effort, but also those crises that pop up. Most recently, some around our undocumented student community and the current political climate, and making sure that our undocumented community members, whether they're students, faculty, or staff, feel safe and covered and cared for at the college. So that brief is what I'll call it. Not so brief, but a snapshot of what it is that I do every single day.
Well, it sounds like you have an invigorating life and a wonderful list of responsibilities, which is wonderful. Can you share your journey to becoming a vice president of student services at Sacramento City College, and what inspired you to pursue a career around student services, student affairs, and what have you?
Yes, it's probably one of my favorite questions to be asked, if I'm being honest, Sylvester. It is my background or my exposure to student affairs and ultimately student services, which I see as one and the same often. And that's because I come from the 4-year, and the 4-year is referred to as student affairs, right? And then there's a student services component within student affairs at the 4-year. Whereas in the California community college system, it's largely referred to as student services. So I use both terms interchangeably, understanding that ultimately we're saying the same thing. My journey is pretty typical. I found myself as an undergrad at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo struggling. First generation Black student from San Francisco, made my way to Central California where nobody looked like me, right? And the only way I could survive is if I got involved. And one of the ways that folks from historically marginalized backgrounds get involved is getting an on-campus job, because we got to get some money from somewhere.
That's right.
And so I remember it was my second year of college. I did not work my first year. As my second year of college, and I was working in what is equivalent to the CAF, right? Where folks will go to various spots, get their food. Now, I was not remotely interested in preparing the food, but I was absolutely interested in ringing folks up. So every single day, there was a woman who would come through my line, a Black woman, and I knew she worked there. I could tell she was coming by her footsteps. I had memorized the sound of her feet, right? And it's important to understand that mentorship, since I was a young person, was very important to me. While I'm a 70s baby, I was raised in the 80s, and 80s is the crack era, and my parents fell victim to that. And so because of some of the choices that they made, they couldn't be role models for me at a time where I really needed to lean into a model that would help expose a life of prosperity, me to a life of prosperity and success. And so what I would do is I would establish relationships with women administrators or teachers from as early as first grade, from as early as first grade to this moment in time that I'm referencing. And so every single day, this woman would come through my line and she would typically order the same thing, a Chick-fil-A sandwich and some waffle fries with a Polynesian sauce. And every day she would say hello to me.
Okay.
And I thought she was fly. She would wear suits. She had this cute little short haircut. She was a little sassy, very confident, melanated sister, petite, but had a very strong presence. And so those exchanges went from, hey, to how you doing, to what are you studying, to what are you interested in? And one day she asked me a question that changed everything for me. And that was simply, would you like to work in an office opposed to food services? And my thought was, I don't know anyone who wants to smell or who likes to smell like chicken every day, but count me in. I do. And that was my introduction to student affairs. She, at the time, was the executive director of Associated Students Incorporated. And at that time, I was connected to NSBE, although I was an English degree. You're at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. There's not a lot of Black folks, so you lean into everything Black. And at the time, it was the National Society of Black Engineers. And so I leaned into that. I was working with them, but I hadn't been exposed to much more than that. And it was, her name was Dr. Tancia Lilly. She recently retired from UT Austin as the vice president of student affairs. It was her that introduced me to a career in higher education, specifically student affairs. It was her that taught me the importance of operating with a high level of integrity. It was her that taught me the importance of being early. To be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late. And That's to be late is unacceptable.
That's right. I like that. That's right.
Right. She's the one who taught me to dress for the job that I want, not for the job that I'm in. She is the one that taught me to take myself everywhere I go. Even when there are moments where you feel like imposter syndrome might be creeping in, you take your whole self into every meeting or every space that you enter, because you can't be your best self if you're leaving parts of yourself behind. And this was really important for me because, remember, 70s baby, raised in the 80s, crack epidemic. My mama wasn't what I needed her to be. I was raised by my maternal grandmother, but that generation gap created some challenges. And so this woman was roughly 12 years older than me. So she was someone that I could aspire to be like. At the same time, she had just had a baby. So I ended up turning into his big sister, if you will. I would keep him when she was traveling. I would assist her in editing and reviewing her dissertation document. She was pursuing her doctorate at the time. She is the one that inspired me to be for others what she was for me. And that was my introduction to student affairs. So I started as a customer service rep in her office, managing the front desk. I then began to pursue opportunities in the multicultural center. She has strategically placed me on the subcommittee for diversity for WASC accreditation as a student voice. She had strategically placed me on hiring committees for administrators at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo so that they would have representation for Black folks, Black students specifically, in a post-Prop 209 era where we were disappearing from the halls of higher education, specifically Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And in my senior year, she took her talents to UCLA. And I did, after I finished undergrad, what I knew best was to follow the template. She got a master's degree in San Bernardino in education. I got a master's degree in San Bernardino in education. I ended up pursuing my first position in higher ed at UC Riverside, all with her support, all with her template from her first resume, all with her mentorship and guidance. And it's because of her that I now proudly serve as the Vice President of Student Services, because of what she exposed me to. So her support, her presence, her love, her unapologetic commitment to young Black women ascending into this career field, it was that made me want to be for others what she was for me.
What an inspiring story.
Thank you.
It is so wonderful to hear how mentorship has resulted into an effective transformation.
Yes.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. And thank you for sharing. What are some of the biggest challenges facing student services today, and how have you addressed them?
Oh my goodness. Great question.
Finances or
it's an interesting place, because I think this question highlights what an individual values.
That's right.
It really does. It highlights what an individual values. And I know exactly where it took me. And one could say finances, right? One could say timely degree completion for our students. But I'll be honest with you, what I see, one of the biggest challenges facing student services has been the greatest challenge since the integration of education for communities of color and historically marginalized communities. And that is addressing systemic barriers that disproportionately impact students of color, first-gen students, and those navigating challenges. To me, those are the greatest challenges. And they're the greatest challenges because they're the ones that can be so easily swept under the rug. That folks can kind of just say, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or we don't want to get into the business of student service, of social services, or is it really our issue, or are the students coming to us underprepared? I don't know about you, but I'm fairly familiar with your history in higher ed, Sylvester, and you just learned a little bit about mine. It'll be impossible to convince me that the vast majority of students of color are coming into systems of higher ed underprepared. I believe the system of higher education is actually underprepared for students of color and first generation students, and opposed to taking this cookie cutter, we've always done it this way approach. We should reevaluate how we serve our students. We cannot be self-proclaimed equity champions, but then constantly replicate the same old same or maintain status quo. So for me, the traditional structures of higher ed are rooted in white supremacist ideology. They were not established with students that look like you or me in mind, with queer students in mind, with students with varying abilities, both cognitive and physical in mind, with women in mind, with students of various gender identities in mind. And so for me, addressing the systemic barriers that disproportionately impact our most marginalized student communities is higher ed's for student services greatest challenge. At Sac City, like I said, I have the great honor of serving as the Vice President of Student Services. In that work, I take great pride in leading and streamlining services that develop more of an equity focus. So whether it's equity-minded funding models or creating a more holistic approach to student services or student support systems, that's been my commitment to ensure that students are not only seen and heard, but more importantly, supported. Because if we don't change that, then the challenge that has always been will be the challenge that remains.
You know what? I want to, first of all, thank you for that complete answer. And I just want to add one thing from the faculty perspective and from the perspective working as an administrator as well. I think one of the challenges is that a lot of the professionals, both faculty as well as administrators, don't really understand the structure of the system in order to be able to navigate and change. For instance, there are many people, classroom academics, who really know nothing about the difference between instruction and student services. They don't know at all. I can say that as a professor, there are many instructors or professors, whatever we're called, that don't know anything really about what is student services. They just receive emails. They don't take the time. Where on the other side, there are many. That's why I'm so enthralled by your conversation. There are many administrators who know nothing about instruction. So one of the challenges in making recommended changes and walking through a journey to make changes is you have to have some sort of empathy and understand some of the idioms that are part of that particular group in order to impact conversation, because the system is so, I don't want to say stifled, but it is such a governance system. And a governance system is all about collaboration. It's like a church-minded theology where you have to have conversations to make major changes. You don't have to have conversations to have an intent in your heart, but you do have to have the ability to understand how to impact and to prick the heart and the soul in order to help guide those academics or those student service professionals in order to make change. So I appreciate your answer, and I just wanted to add that because I find that interviewing so many different people, and a man having been in the system so long in all three of the California structures, I find that many people, many professionals really don't understand. They're good at what they do, but they don't understand the total landscape of higher education. And what really kind of makes me say that is because I remember when I got involved with the Academic Senate so many years ago, I didn't know what the Academic Senate was. And there was a lady on the campus at Los Alamos College who came to me, and I had been there 20 years at that time, and I wanted to do something different and exciting. And she said, why don't you go to the Academic Senate? Now, I had a great music program. I had a wonderful array of learning tools and teaching students and inspiring students. But when I got on the state senate, it forced me, and I became very enthralled about reading about the structure of the community college. Really, what is higher education? How does higher education differ at the community college versus the state university versus the UC system? You know, and so I found for myself was that one of the ways that I became more knowledgeable is that I had to develop an interest in understanding the system in order to become part of an intelligent part of conversation. Because I would go to meetings for years and I was just there, but I wasn't there. I was more concerned about just my students and the classroom, and I didn't understand how everything really worked. Now I do.
Yes.
I put a lot in it. So what you said kind of sparked that. So I want to thank you for your passion for helping and wanting to make change, not just for people of color, but for people in general. Yeah. Because I think so often what happens is that the world thinks that if you are a person of color, you're only concerned about a person of color. And that's not true. You're concerned about everyone, but the challenge is that many times individuals of color, they're coming into a world that has nothing for them. And so they kind of need an equitized approach to learning. And so having said that, can you, how do you ensure that student support programs are accessible to all your students, including some of your underrepresented students and your non-traditional students?
Sure, I can answer that question. If I can go back a little bit, I think there is a great truth to the comment that you made. A lot of times folks believe that those of us who are committed to advancing the experience and the success of students of color, that we pick a side and choose students of color over non-students of color. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
That's right.
It's hard at times for folks to separate that belief, especially when a person of color is leading the efforts around advancing students of color experiences. But the reality is, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And so while we have navigated a world, specifically within higher education, where we want to be mindful of the things that we say so as not to be viewed as an individual that's focused only on one specific community, I'm going to challenge our leaders in this work, all of our leaders in this work, to be confident and comfortable with focusing on a community. There's nothing wrong with seeing a community or a passion that you have. We all have a vested interest, whether we're members of the queer community, whether we're members of a community with varying physical or cognitive differences, whether we're lower socioeconomic, whether we're veterans, whether we're former foster youth, whether they're people of color. We have a connection to these communities. In those connections lies a deeply rooted lived experience that fuels our passion to serve that community. And folks should not be encouraged to water down that passion so that folks outside of that community feel a little more comfortable. I reject that.
That's right.
Idea.
That's right.
Completely. And I say that because I found myself over the last year and some change where I have to stand deep and firm in who I am as a Black woman. As a Black woman who's a leader in this work doesn't mean I don't care about Latino students, doesn't mean I don't care about Asian students, doesn't mean that I don't care about Pacific Islander students. I absolutely do. But when it comes to that data, and this is, I'm dovetailing now into the question that you most recently asked. When it comes to that data, the most marginalized student community, the most underserved student community, the student community with the lowest completion rate happens to be the community by which I identify with.
That's right. Right?
And so folks got to just get comfortable with that. They just got to be okay with that. In addition to that, people have to be comfortable with creating opportunities for the most marginalized community, irrespective of what that community is and the community that you identify with, prioritizing them. Because the reality is, when the most underserved community wins, everybody wins. But when you focus on the communities that may be doing better, you're missing the opportunity to better serve the most marginalized and underserved. And we forget that. So in your question around how do I ensure that student programs are inclusive and accessible to students, including underrepresented or non-traditional students, we start with data. We do it with love and we do it with awareness, but you got to start with data. And that means disaggregating the data to identify where the inequities lie and then identify solutions that will help move the needle, right? If we approach this work through the lens of equality, then equity gaps will remain the same. There will be no progress for Black students. There will be no progress for brown students. There will be no progress for Asian students. There will be no progress for Pacific Islander students. And let me be intentional. A lot of times you will hear API students, and that's cool. That's cute. We also have to acknowledge that Asian American students are very different from Pacific Islander students. They have a different lived experience. So it's important for us to call them out individually, opposed to lumping us all together, assuming that what it will be helpful for the Pacific Islander community might be helpful for the Hmong community or other Southeast Asian communities. That's not always the case. But we do things out of convenience and comfortability, opposed to courageousness. And to me, being courageous means looking at the data, disaggregating the data, and being accountable for what it says. And if it's telling you that your Black students, your Latinx students, your Asian students, your Pacific Islander students, your queer students, your Native students, your undocumented students, your justice involved students are the most underserved, that is where you focus. So when you ask, how do I ensure that student support services are inclusive and accessible to students? I focus on the data, I disaggregate the data, and we come up with systems and frameworks and approaches to support the individual student community's needs, opposed to this cookie cutter approach that higher education has been rooted in since its inception that clearly does not support these communities of color or marginalization in the way that it supports non-marginalized student communities. And ways that we do that at Sac City is inclusive of kind of like a more case management model, whether it's through our RISE program or through learning communities. We recently established the most recent learning community for our Pacific Islander students known as VACA. We've co-located services, understanding that our students are often first gen or often lower socioeconomic. So when they get to campus, having an admissions and records office on one end of the campus and a financial aid office on another end of the campus is not ideal, because 9 times out of 10, if a student has a question about A&R, they got one about financial aid too. Why not co-locate them? Why not partner together to make sure that at baseline minimum, our financial aid team and our A&R team can help all students, irrespective of what their questions are. And if they don't have an answer to that question, they know that someone right next to them does have an answer to the question. So whether it's through case management, whether it's co-located services, where it's creating new learning communities, where it's community-informed practices to help meet students where they are and identify where they want to go and then help them get there. All of that is rooted through data, and all of that is how we ensure that student services are inclusive and accessible to all students.
Dr. Brown, you have a heart of gold.
Thank you.
And that is, I'm a really good judge of people's character. You have great character. You do. I interview a lot of wonderful people, but everybody don't have a heart of gold. But you have a real heart of gold, have a heart of caring, but you have a lot of wisdom and common sense. And that's that's a lot of times what educators lack. They sometimes just lack basic mother wit. And having said that, how do you leverage technology and innovation to enhance student services and engagement?
Great question. You lean into it. You know, I go back to this thought often. At the core of education, period, but certainly with higher education, is rooted in change. We exist because we want to change people's lives. And in order to change people's lives, we have to get them to and through their collegiate experience. Getting them to and through their collegiate experience requires change, because every 2 years, you need to be rotating older students out and newer students in the same way that we make adjustments to address the needs, whether they are student services needs or instructional needs of the new students that are coming in. We have to take into consideration how technology will allow us to do that when it comes to reducing barrier, right? So for me, leveraging the use of technology is inclusive of the reduction of barriers opposed to the reinforcement of them. Okay. Right. So leveraging technology and innovation to enhance student support, student services and engagement could be, and some folks gonna be upset with me in 2025 saying this. We need to lean into AI because it's not going anywhere.
Oh no.
It's not, and our students already know how to do it. So opposed to being more concerned about whether or not they are using it to compromise the integrity of their learning experience, have a greater understanding of how savvy they are with leveraging it and making sure that they are mastering the content that's provided to them in the classroom or through the services that we provide. So reducing barriers. If in fact, I know that counseling appointments are 2 weeks out and students need to see a counselor now, leveraging AI to be able to, and this is alongside our counseling faculty partners. I want to be very clear when I say that, but leveraging a technological tool that will be able to help answer students' questions in real time live, so they don't have to wait 2 weeks to get to you, because 2 weeks can be the difference between the decision, a student deciding to stay or deciding to leave. and then using that technology to capture all of the questions the student has asked and build a repository of those questions, because 9 times out of 10, those aren't isolated questions. Multiple students have those questions, and now we can create a more comprehensive FAQ for our website to be able to answer students' questions in advance, right? So then when students need to schedule a meeting with the counselor, they're scheduling meetings with counselors to answer questions that are not on this FAQ list, right? And so whether it is my experience implementing various tools, whether it's High Point or Starfish or early alert systems, Salesforce, things of that nature, that virtual engagement piece, that online counseling, that targeted research can all be used to improve a student's experience and keep them more connected to the college in a way that's meaningful for them. Because we also have to remember, we are not solely educating folks that attend classes Monday through Thursday between the hours of 8 and 5 when our employee base is there. We're educating folks who work full time, who have a myriad of family and community obligations. So it could be 11 p.m. at night when they finally get an opportunity to ask a question. You know, counselor working at 11 p.m. at night, there is not an A&R professional working at 11 p.m. at night.
That's right.
Right? But if we leverage the use of technology to be able to answer some of those questions, then our students won't feel lost in the sauce and make a decision to exit stage left, because they will have had a tool that will help reduce those barriers, opposed to reinforcing them because you need to speak with me and I'm 2 weeks out for an appointment.
Great answer. That's wonderful. I have just one other question before we exit our wonderful, inspiring interview. And this is kind of a complicated one.
Okay.
And I use this question because of the current climate. Please share the community work you've accomplished for the improvement of the protected classes with respect to the current equity versus equality movement. Because, you know, the one political side says that equality is what's needed, and another says that equality is not complete. Education is not complete with just equality. You need to marry it with equitable resources. And that really is a huge, as you know, political issue, not just locally, but on a national
scale.
And national scale. You know, do we focus on equality, you know, services for all, or do we offer those that chair or those steps that will help the person, even though they get in the door, they may be too short to look over.
Right. I know exactly the visual that you're referencing. And I'll honestly answer, it's not a difficult question for me. But starting first, you know, you asked the question. I was like, this question will really highlight a person's value system. And it's hard not to see what people value in their response to questions like these. Because as you said earlier, there are a lot of folks who don't have a lot of sense. My grandmother used to tell me, girl, sense ain't common. Right? And it's not. I believe an individual's lived experience is what helps to inform the response to this specific question. And if you've had a lived experience that has not been laden with inequities, then you will see it. You will place a greater value on equality.
That's right.
Right? But the reality is, if I'm in a 100-yard dash and you've got a 50-yard head start, I'm never going to win. I don't care how fast I am. I'm never going to win if you have a 50-yard start on me. And that is where we are, especially communities of color. That is where we are. There's not a community of color within this nation that has not experienced some significant form of oppression. Not one. And people can argue which one has been more gross when compared to others. I'm not here to debate that. the reality is we've all experienced some sort of oppression at the hands of the most privileged in this nation. And so if the most privileged in this nation already are standing on 10 boxes, you giving me 10 boxes is not going to place me at the same level as them if they've been standing on 10 boxes for 100, 200, 300, 400 years. There's generational wealth, there's generational network, there's generational knowledge, there's generational awareness that I'm not privy to. So for me, when it comes to the difference between equity and equality, you got to right the wrong. And righting the wrong means providing the resources that will get us to a point of equal mobility. Don't just put me on the same line and say, all right, you all are now equal. I don't come with the same network as I referenced. I don't come with years of educational experience. While my son is a second generation college graduate, he grew up with fourth and fifth generation college graduates. I was 30 years old and hadn't purchased my first home yet, while I had a 22-year-old white male student whose parents, as a graduation gift, bought him a house.
That's right.
He's on 10 boxes. I'm 2. I'm 30. He's 22. So my position is always going to be, we need an equitable approach to this work to get us to a place of equal mobility.
That's right.
Right? Now, when you ask about the community work that I've accomplished for the improvement of the work, specific to the overall community, I've served proudly for Sacramento, now Capital Black Chamber in Sacramento. I've had the great honor of establishing a virtual community of over 200,000 women of Black sons called MOBS Movement, Moms of Black Sons, where we come together and share our varied experience, support, insight, resources, things of that nature, to better support one another during a time where the nation is not very kind to Black men. And we all have a shared experience, and that is a fear of how this world is going to treat our sons when they enter adulthood. I serve on the statewide DEIA Institute Planning Committee. I have had the great honor of serving as a fellow mentor for Pipeline of Possibilities, which is an organization dedicated to diversifying both the faculty, classified and managerial ranks within the California Community College system. I serve as a board member for the Coalition, a social justice entity made up of members of Amend, Apahi, Colegas, and two Black women, because there weren't Black women voices in this specific collective. I've established my own organization alongside 4 fiery, well-educated, extremely competent, courageous sisters of mine that serve as presidents of California community colleges, vice presidents of community colleges, and deans of California community colleges, known as the Queendom, where we are committed to truth-telling, spirit-lifting, gap-filling, bridge-building, change-making when it comes to creating space for women of color to be heard. I do a variety of great things. I've been a part of a more than 100-year legacy. I spent the last 26 years serving the illustrious Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, of which I am a proud member. So when you ask, what do I give back to the community? I give back to the community in a variety of ways, and those are just a few examples that I'm very proud, very proud to be a part of these organizations.
Well, during this enthralling interview, you've given a lot to me. And I want to thank you. I'm going to ask you my last question.
Okay.
Would you like to share any thoughts and ideas that you would like to communicate with our digital audience? If you would please share.
Sure. If I shared anything, a lot of folks define leadership in a variety of ways. Some of folks confuse it with management and supervision. I think it's important, a few things. One, with respect to leadership, it's important to understand that leadership is not about a position, it's about a purpose. And for me specifically, my purpose is to be who I needed when I was younger. That's why I do this work. That was a voice of affirmation. That was an advocate for what I believe justice was for me. That was a builder of systems where Black and Brown students don't just survive, they thrive, they do well, and they bring folks that look like them along with them. I believe in storytelling, and I believe you can't send a message absent of your story. And I believe that when you combine both data and storytelling together, you're able to both lead with your head and your heart. And that's where I'm in this work. The leadership is not a position, but a purpose piece is connected to the heart work that's necessary and being a manager within higher education, because it's only then that we truly unlock the full power of education to be able to change lives. And the two other things that I will leave you with are two statements that I live by. One is, if it ain't beneficial, it's artificial. So if it doesn't benefit you, it's not for you. That's right. If it's not beneficial, it's artificial. If it doesn't benefit students, it's not for students. If it doesn't benefit your team, it's not for your team, period. And the last one is the manner in which how we approach navigating this space. We started this conversation and you asked me how I was doing. And I said, you know what? These days I choose to wallow in joy. I make that decision every single morning when I wake up. I can choose to lean into frustrating points of the day, or I can choose to wallow in joy. And so as I navigate both my personal life and my professional life, I'm constantly reminding myself when troubles come my way, and knowing that they don't last always, I ask myself, Davin, is this an obstacle or is this an opportunity? And the manner in which I approach it is going to determine the outcome. So if I choose to lean in to the obstacle, then it's going to be difficult. But if I choose to take the route of opportunity, then I get to highlight how exceptional I am moving through adversity and reminding myself that yes, troubles don't last always, and weapons may form, but they will never, ever prosper.
That's right. As president of this company entitled Professor for Life, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to discuss your journey, because you have reinforced my belief to keep hope alive and to keep life alive. What a wonderful professional you are. I wish you nothing but much success in all of your endeavors, and we'll hopefully be talking soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you once again. Have a positive day. Thank you.
You do the same. Bye-bye.